departments had critical equipment. The 1950s would mark a golden age of growth and quality of life in Bellaire. Returning veterans set off a housing boom that would eventually double the population of the city to over 10,000.
Well, the government decided that the GI house had to have 6 shrubs and 2 trees or 8 shrubs, and that's what they got. But then they came and wanted other things. And so we had the bedding plants already. We had the nursery stock, the shrubs, and we were growing trees. We had lots of trees.
A new newspaper was born in 1954 to serve the growing city, the Bellaire Texan. The weekly publication's editor was Bellaire resident Jack Gurwell. The Texan covered every aspect of community life, and it also hired much of its staff from the community and from the Gurwell family.
Oh, I helped all the time. I drove the advertising down there. I drove and got the copy. I was the gopher. You know, in those days we did lead type. We sat on linotypers. Then they'd take the sticks of red type, put them on a stone, it's called, and then lock that up in a page. One time, the lockup was not tight enough, and it threw the paper all over the floor, all those little bitty pieces of type. But we got it out. There was wild things. It was wild.
Bellaire, like much of the nation during this period, enjoyed a time of welcome peace and prosperity, and a blossoming of community that made life growing up here like a storybook.
When I went to Condit Elementary, we'd walk to school. So when we went home from school, we'd usually stop in the police station and visit with Bonnie Russell or some of the policemen. We didn't know, I mean, it was not a bad place. It was a good place, and they were our friends. They'd talk to us as kids, and we'd go merrily on our way.
We were friends, of course, with the people who ran the filling stations. And I would just go and take the car and they would fill it up, and I'd just say, charge it, and drive away.
Glenn McCarthy came to Houston and built a beautiful Shamrock, and there was nothing between our house and the Shamrock except some few trees and a few houses here and there. And you could see, at night you could see the big spotlights that put Houston on the map with the beautiful Shamrock that he had built, and it was just gorgeous.
And we went to Dugan's drugstore, and Nancy would fix us chocolate malts. She'd see us coming in, and she would take and have it ready for us. She knew what we were there for.
It was strange. We said maybe there was something in the water, but we all got pregnant at the same time. So our children, as they were growing up, they had lots of playmates and never, they had a lot of birthday parties. As soon as they hit a year old, we had birthday parties.
The firemen would come around and ask for any volunteers at that time. And even one time we had a cow go by, just wandered into the pasture. And we also square danced on the street when it got paved.
When we first moved to Bellaire, there was no air conditioning, so we used the front yard a lot for communication. We sat out with the kids in the afternoon and at night, and we kind of reared other people's children too.
At night, we would go out and put a quilt out on clear nights on the ground, and Daddy gave Mother a telescope, and we would lay on the quilt and look at the stars.
We didn't have locks on our doors. Our doors were always open. We didn't have a fence for a long time. They were always in our yard, but I'd fix dinner at night in the evening, and here comes the little Thompson boys would come in and see what we had to eat, and sometimes they'd join us, you know, and they'd bring their little dog in. It was really something. They were so cute.
Our favorite place that we used to like to eat was Felix's Mexican restaurant. When we first moved in Bellaire, we didn't have a lot of money, but my husband got paid every 2 weeks. So we would go to Felix's and have a big feast. That was always really good.
Everybody went to Big Boys afterwards, after the council meetings. I don't care if you were on one side or the other, they were always there talking and eating ice cream. And the council meetings always were very elaborate with a lot of people in the community. They could be on one side or the other, but they still went there. And they got along fine.
Horn Elementary School from kindergarten on through, back then 6th grade. And every spring we had a May Fete. It was a dance with costumes that all the parents dreaded having to find and make. I remember my mom making so many peasant blouses that she just wore out, I don't know how many patterns, but she would always make peasant blouses. Rick-rack was popular then.
And it felt unencumbered by fear and worry from the child's point of view. It reminded me of other small towns, I think, where we had freedom to roam, and we were gone from morning till night, and as long as we got home in time for dinner, I think everything was okay.
Bellaire now had many new venues for entertainment and recreation available. The new community center became a focal point for all kinds of social activities and sports.
The Bellaire Community Building was across the street from Condit Elementary School, and every Friday afternoon, I think it was a Friday, I can't remember, we had a chum club, and we'd come over and watch movies. And I always credit this one movie for scaring me to death when I was a kid. It's called The Iron Claw.
I think it was my mother that made me take these square dance lessons at the Bellaire Community Center. So I got into that and found that was quite fun. I had more fun than I thought I was going to have. So.
I went there many times when they had drama, tap dancing, all the different activities that the children were in. And by the way, when my children got older, then I made them teach the younger ones. Then they had to come here in the summer and help teach the younger ones. I think that's the way it should be.
Bellaire also had an amateur theater company that put on regular plays on the Condit Elementary cafeteria stage. All of the players were local residents.
There was a director, and she was with St. John's School, and very good. And the people that got the parts, there was a woman from New York, and she'd married somebody in Bellaire. And then the leading man was Dr. Moore. He was an obstetrician, and he was the obstetrician for a lot of women on our street.
Talent seemed to be in great supply in Bellaire, and a singing group from Bellaire Presbyterian Church found a good deal of national fame.
One day I'm washing dishes on Evergreen Street, and I hear the radio, and I'm listening to those 4 singers who are with Godfrey. And I think, we can do that. We can do that as well as they are doing it. They were famous singers. There was nothing in Houston at that time of this nature, but we were being dressed by Leon Daly, who called us and said, we will get your clothes for you if you want to dress alike, and then we will sell them to you at a discount. We said, wonderful. We were hired to sing at KPRC, which was the one station. So we started singing with a pianist named Paul Schmidt, who was a local musician. We sang on a Dick Gottlieb afternoon show. We did singing commercials, we did coffee, we did airlines. We sang on a couple of records with a country singer named Don Red Berry. We did backups for him, and we just had a great time.
And then there was the Bellaire Movie Theater, a rite of passage for every youngster in the community.
The Bellaire Theater was one of our big Saturday treats. Although it technically wasn't in the city of Bellaire, it was part of our history because that's where all the kids would go on Saturday. I still do not have a fondness for when I was a teenage werewolf. I remember it scaring me silly. For 75 cents, you could have a matinee. I think you got 2 movies at 75 cents, but I do remember being scared very much with that movie.
So going to the movies was a very important experience, and to have a neighborhood theater like that where kids could meet up, on the weekends, and on Saturdays go to the kids shows, and date nights on Friday nights and that kind of thing. It was just a real integral part of the theater. And from listening to those people, that kind of became our format. The format that we tried to institute within the theater was to make it a local community theater once again.
A storm cloud on the horizon was the growing fear of Cold War, and one form it took in Harris County was plans for a new freeway loop that would be constructed right through the heart of Bellaire.
There was originally discussion about a bypass around Loop in Houston in the 1930s, but the first real step towards designation and construction of a loop occurred in 1941 when the Houston City Planning Commission issued a report recommending the designation of a loop mainly to meet anticipated military needs of moving troops through Houston and moving wartime supplies. Now, that proposal included Post Oak Road from the north city limit of Bellaire to Bellaire Boulevard, where the loop went east. Now, at that time, there was no real construction on Post Oak Road. It was simply a designation, and the real freeway status would come later.
The 60s and 70s would prove to be a turbulent era for Bellaire as it was on the national stage. Kicking off the new decade was one of the most destructive hurricanes of Bellaire's history, Hurricane Carla. This Category 5 storm roared across the Texas coast near Port Lavaca on September 11, 1961, and left over $2 billion worth of damage.
The man got up in the attics during Carla and put plywood on our side of the street, which was the east side of the street. The plywood went up all across the back of the house, and they all helped.
We knew about hurricanes, but we'd never been in one. And we went to Playland Park on Friday night, took the kids. They were 9, or 10? 9. 10 years, 10, 9. 12, and 14. And so, of course, my husband wanted to entertain them. Went down there, and boy, the wind was blowing, our skirts were blowing. We didn't know what was going on.
In 1962, another battle took the city by surprise. A new blue law ordinance was enacted that required additional businesses to close on Sunday. One Bellaire business, Charlie's Auto Supply, fought the law and set a precedent.
The police would come, and he was charged, and, we had to get a lawyer, and in fact, I even find his notes that he went to the council to say, this is not fair because I'm being attacked and about opening on Sunday, but other stores in Bellaire, the hardware stores, drug stores, Weingarten's was the big grocery store, they were open on Sunday. I think they finally ended up relenting or saying, okay. So he ran these stores 7 days a week.
By 1964, Loop 610 was being completed through Bellaire. 250 homes had been lost to eminent domain, and the city was grappling with the new realities it brought to the community.
That began the realization that the ramification of Loop 610 created a new land use. Commercial, yes, but nothing like the small little businesses that had been wrangling for years before, but rather looming, high-rise, high-density, complete with lot coverage and lights and traffic, things that Bellaire had not realized was going to happen.
Of course, in those days, it was nearly impossible to stop freeway construction when the authorities decided it was going to be built on a certain location. The legal and administrative mechanisms to oppose freeways simply did not exist. So when they said a freeway was coming through, it was virtually impossible to stop it. But the residents of Bellaire were at least going to voice their objections, even if it would have no impact.
Another storm of sorts hit the Houston airways in 1973. Bellaire native Marvinzindler joined Channel 13 as a reporter. Zindler made a big initial splash by reporting on a house of ill repute in LaGrange that the local sheriff's department had refused to close. But fighting tough battles was nothing new for Marvin. It began with his father, Abe Zindler, and Abe's insistence that Marvin work in the family clothing business.
My dad was not a real big on working retail. He was his own person. Even when he was young, he used to ride with the police department. When he was very young, he rode with the police department, and that was his thing. He loved police work.
My dad had his own horse when he was growing up. And on one Sunday, my grandparents were having a big dinner, and they had a very large dining room in that house. And my dad decided that he was going to walk his horse into the house. And he opened the front door, walked his horse.
He rode it. He rode his horse.
Rode the horse into the house, but he opened the door and rode the horse into the house. And my grandfather went absolutely nuts.
Up the stairs.
Up the stairs, right. Because he wanted to show him that he could, I guess.
By 1977, issues of zoning surrounding the new loop had come to a head. Citizens had become concerned about Wayne Duddleston's plans to build a hotel and a commercial complex at the location of Marion High School.
I met with one of my very good friends, Tom Tier, who was a neighbor, and we talked about what we could do to preserve that area. We discussed the zoning laws and how the zoning laws ought to protect our neighborhood, and it appeared to us that the zoning laws were being ignored and they were being changed as the developers wanted to move into Bellaire. Together, we decided we ought to talk to our neighbors, have a meeting, and we ought to form a civic club where the neighbors could express their thoughts in a way that City Hall would listen, rather than just one person.
There would be a straw vote and many visits to council meetings that revealed a large percentage of the community supported a moratorium on commercial development. But the council wasn't taking their efforts seriously, and development plans proceeded.
Ultimately, we decided what we were going to have to do if we wanted to stop what appeared to us to be a train on the tracks. What we were going to have to do was to recall the city council. Obviously, we had looked at the city laws. We realized that you could do that. None of us wanted to do it.
On August 1st, 1977, the recall vote was held.
And nobody thought they would get a petition signed by the voters in the last election, but they came up with it, and there was a recall election. 4 of the 7 people got recalled. I wasn't petitioned for recall, neither was Louise Ware. But the others were, and one guy got recalled by, I think it was 4 votes. So it's always good. If you think something's wrong, you come down here and squawk, and you can also run for election.
I think it served a purpose in that I think people became a little more tolerant of other people's ideas, that they were willing to listen. And I think that was part of the thing that was missing at the time, and I think that's one reason we had recall.
Looking back at the history of this thing, the context of the Civic Action Club was Houston was in a huge building boom. Buildings were going up everywhere, not just in Bellaire, but all through the city. Shortly after the recall, and part of the economic process that the city of Houston saw and the city of Bellaire saw was that there was a huge bust. The building boom turned into a bust. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
The next 2 decades of Bellaire's growth would feature several major victories for the city. Citizens' volunteer work was bearing fruit in a big way. The Bellaire Women's Civic Club continued to give to the community. Its greatest success story in fundraising was the Bellaire Antique Fair, an event that began in 1959 and was annually staged until 1994. The fair featured antique sales, period costumes, baked goods, and cooking demonstrations.
Moppy Gay decided that we should churn butter while we were baking the bread. And we had her husband had made a makeshift kitchen, and we still had our costumes on. So I churned and I churned and I churned and nothing happened. You cannot churn pasteurized milk. So Moppy Gay went over to Westmoreland Farm, and I have no idea how she did it, got some raw milk, and we churned, and we had fresh butter.
And there was one of our ladies who lives in Galveston now that used to make these rum cakes, and Channel 2 would always come, and Ron Stone was our guy, and he came all the time because she made him a gigantic rum cake that I think she must have pulled a whole bottle of it in there. And Ron Stone would go back to the studio and he would show it to everybody, and they would say, "Oh my gosh, we can smell it all the way over here. Can we have some?" Nope, it's his.
A regular item on sale at the show was a Bellaire cookbook produced by the club that also featured the definitive telling of the history of the city. The Nature Discovery Center, now one of Bellaire's most cherished natural preserves, was also created during this period. The story of its birth is emblematic of the hard work and amazing dedication that characterize volunteers in Bellaire. The journey began in 1981, when Hannah and Arthur Ginsberg headed up a group of residents to redesign and restore Evergreen Park. From ideas submitted by Bellaire school children and inspiration from Dutch park projects, new wooden playground equipment was built, entirely with volunteer labor.